All right, well, let's get started here. Looks like most of the group is on. So good afternoon. Welcome to our second stakeholder involvement group meeting for the Old McHenry Crossings project. And we're excited to bring this group back together and see a few new faces that weren't able to attend our first meeting. My name is Ben Vanderwall with Trans Systems, and we'll introduce you to the rest of the project team here in a moment. But first, I just like to say thank you for your time. Thank you for being here and volunteering for this group. We know you all have busy schedules, and we want to assure you that the input we get from you today and in the future is crucial to the success of the project moving forward. And we also wanted to take the opportunity to remind you to check out our project website. It's listed here at the bottom of the screen, omxproject.com. It's there as a public resource for you. It has project-related news, public meeting summaries, a list of FAQs, project informational exhibits, and much more. So there's also an interactive comment map, as well as a form for written comments, which can be submitted 24/7. So please share with your friends, your neighbors, and family, and encourage them to share their thoughts with us as well. So with that, I'm going to ask Matt Smith to take us through the agenda for today's meeting. Matt?
All right, thanks, Ben. Good afternoon. My name is Matt Smith, and I'm from Trans Systems, and I am the consultant project manager working with the Lake County Division of Transportation on the Old McHenry Crossing study. We have another full agenda today, and we're excited to fill you in on our recent work and get into more of the project details. We will have a small 5-minute break in about an hour or so. And our main focus today is to present to you our project purpose and need document. Also, we're going to introduce the alternatives development process and get your feedback on our process and input on what alternatives should be considered for both Old McHenry Road and for Quentin Road. Next slide. This is an overview of our team and a reminder that we are working with the Lake County Division of Transportation, the Illinois Department of Transportation, and the Federal Highway Administration on this study. Our consultant team includes Christopher B. Burke Engineering and Tesca Associates. And then please note, we mentioned this last time, the role of the stakeholder involvement group is advisory. All final decisions will be made by Lake County DOT with approval authority from the Illinois Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration. We plan to use you as our SIG to provide input throughout the decision-making process. Next slide. This is the group assembled here today that will be part of our meeting. Kevin Carrier and Chuck Gleason are both from Lake County DOT, and the rest of the men and women shown here on the slide are part of our project team. And most of these, all of these people will be involved in the presentation today or in our breakout session in the second half of the meeting. Next slide. A quick reminder since our last meeting that our SIG involves representatives from various groups, municipalities, and organizations along both roadways and around the study area. We have local residents and commuters combined with representatives from St. Matthews, Forest Lake Community Association, Ford Stride Stables, and others shown here on this slide. Not all members have been able to join us yet, but we continue to provide status updates to everyone, and we're committed to maintaining our open process throughout. Ben?
Thanks, Matt. So just some logistics here to get through with the Zoom utilization here. At the top of your screen, you'll see 2 different view options. We recommend the speaker view during the presentation. And then when we move into our small group workshop activity, we recommend switching to the gallery view, but feel free to change back and forth to see what works best for you. Please keep yourselves muted throughout the meeting. And if you'd like to turn your camera off, feel free unless you're speaking. And then if you do have any questions or comments at any point during the meeting today, we'd like you for you to use the chat box to send us those questions. And you can do this at any time. You don't have to wait for the designated Q&A period. The chat box can be found along the bottom of your screen where the Zoom controls are. When you do that, please direct your questions to Matt Sis. He's going to gather those comments and questions until a designated time, and then we'll read them aloud, share them with the group, and we'll try to address them as best as we can. We do have 2 Q&A sessions, one about halfway through and then a second one at the end. So if you missed that first one, you can don't freak out. You can add another question anytime after that first Q&A session. We'll get you at the end. And please be courteous to all. The SIG is meant to be a constructive and productive group. The first meeting went great, really well. So we really appreciate your input and cooperation on that. And lastly, this meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the group and to the public through the aforementioned project website. And with that out of the way, I'm going to pass the mic back over to Matt for a quick recap of our first SIG meeting back in November.
So at our meeting in November, we discussed the objective of our study, which is to improve safety, traffic operations, and connectivity for motorists, bicyclists, and pedestrians within our study area. We discussed our project development process and our schedule. And just a reminder that our current schedule assumes construction starting in 2026. We introduced to you our public involvement approach, and we talked about the SIG and how we plan to engage you in our work over the rest of this year and into next year. And then we also reviewed the results of the virtual forum, got input from you on the issues and needs in the area, and we introduced you to the NEPA process. Next slide. We conducted 2 workshops, one with a Mentimeter and one small group discussion. We got feedback from you covering important questions like which intersections are of the greatest concern and what special characteristics of the corridor should be protected. The Mentimeter tool allowed us to get some instant responses from you and see how the group felt about these questions. Next slide. At the end of our meeting, we split into 3 groups and gave you the floor to share with us your thoughts on the issues and needs in the study area. This is where we learned more details about what was asked in the Mentimeter exercise, and we got good feedback from all of you that we're using and what we'll be presenting to you today. Next slide. So over the last few months, what has our team been doing? So we have been moving forward on a variety of items listed here. Starting it off, we did provide all of you a written summary of the first meeting, and we will continue to do that for all of our meetings going forward. We welcome comments on those meeting summaries. We know it's a lot of information, but we do appreciate you reading it and letting us know if there's anything we missed. We do want to make sure that we're capturing it all appropriately. Looking on to some of the other things, we've completed more of our surveys in the field and initiated some historic structure surveys back in early December. And really our largest effort over the last 3 months has been in relation to our traffic and safety studies and the development of our purpose and need document, which will be the focus of our presentation today. Next slide. This graphic here is an overview of the phase 1 process. And today we're moving over to step 2 of our study process, which is all about the purpose and need. And in our next steps, we will develop a full range of reasonable alternatives, and that will include a no-build alternative that must be considered to be in line with NEPA. We will evaluate and screen all the alternatives through a 2-level process to ultimately identify our preferred alternative. And we will complete all the necessary environmental documentation during this process. Public involvement and input from you as our SIG will run throughout the study. We want your thoughts and comments, and we want you to know how the decisions are being made. So at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Mike McHenry to talk about the purpose and need.
Thank you, Matt, and good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here. We're going to spend about the next 25 minutes talking about purpose and need, which is really the foundation of the project going forward, and we will have a question and answer session at the end, as Matt noted. So jumping right in November, we briefly discussed the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and the requirement for this project to comply with NEPA to be eligible to use federal funding for construction. We also discussed the purpose and need statement as being the first step in the NEPA process, and we provided a link to relevant NEPA videos on YouTube. So hopefully you've had a chance to see those, but if not, we're providing the link again here. Today, we want to provide an overview of the draft purpose and needs statement for the Old McHenry Crossings project. It's a lot of information for today, but as noted at the bottom of the slide, we will be providing a copy of the draft purpose and needs statement for SIG members to review after this meeting, and it'll help us finalize and formalize the purpose and needs statement going forward. For the presentation today, we'll be providing an overview of the purpose and need contents and review some of the key elements. So what is a purpose and need statement? The purpose statement, as indicated here, is a brief statement of the transportation problem to be solved and outlines the project goals and objectives. The project need provides the context and data that supports that stated project purpose. Again, the project purpose and need statement is a formal NEPA document. So in addition to review by the SIG, it will also be reviewed by the Lake County Division of Transportation, the Illinois Department of Transportation, and the Federal Highway Administration. It does not identify alternatives, but establishes the basis for identifying feasible and reasonable alternatives to be considered. And it's important to note that alternatives eventually identified must meet the project purpose and need to be considered reasonable under NEPA. Next slide, please. So what is the purpose of the Old McHenry Crossings project? The stated transportation purpose of the Old McHenry Crossings project, as included in the draft purpose and need document, is shown here, which is to provide an improved transportation system to address capacity, safety, and mobility deficiencies along Old McHenry Road and Quentin Road based on past and projected future growth in the project area, and to improve non-motorized connections within the project area. A key element of the project will be to evaluate a new grade separation over or under of Old McHenry Road at the CN Railroad crossing. From the NEPA perspective, there is flexibility in the project purpose statement, but again, it does not address alternatives or impacts. For example, we will be striving to avoid or minimize impacts, which is required under NEPA. But this is part of the alternatives evaluation process that we'll be discussing a little later this afternoon and is not part of the purpose and need statement per se. Next slide, please. So what is the need for the Old McHenry Crossings project? The need is based really on several key elements, including the planning history, meaning what is the history of this project and what agencies have been involved in the planning of this project to date? The connection of the project area to the regional transportation network, meaning how do the existing roadways in the project area function, both locally and regionally? And the projected growth in population and employment within and adjacent to the project area, which is a key factor for future travel demand or future traffic volumes, if you will. For this project, we've also looked at future conditions at the CN Railroad crossing as well. As we've discussed, the future time frame being evaluated for this project is the year 2050, which is the basis of the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, or CMAP, onto 2050 Comprehensive Regional Plan, which must be considered based on federal project development procedures. Based on existing and projected future travel demand or traffic volumes, we have compared travel performance within the project area for existing conditions and the year 2050 based on the no-build condition. The 2050 no-build condition means what will be the effects on travel performance in the project area if no improvements are made in the project area between now and the year 2050. The need also considers other elements such as safety and non-motorized connections, such as sidewalks, bike paths, multi-use paths, and stakeholder input. For today, I will provide an overview of that planning history, the project area connection to the regional transportation network, the projected growth in population, employment, and traffic volumes. And then Julia will give the group an overview of the effects of that growth on travel performance within the project area for that 2050 no-build condition. And she'll also provide a summary of the completed safety analysis. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about that planning history. What is the planning history for this project? The Old McHenry Crossings project has been in development from a planning perspective for some time. It's been envisioned as part of local and regional planning efforts by multiple agencies. The main elements of this planning history are listed here and include the Lake County 2040 Long Range Transportation Plan that speaks to a projected 36% increase in peak period travel trips throughout the county and the resulting need to evaluate future improvements on that basis to Old McHenry Road and Quentin Road. The Lake County 5-year proposed transportation improvement program that includes funding for initiation of preliminary and design engineering for the Old McHenry Crossings project. The Illinois Commerce Commission Safety Improvement Program that identifies the CN Railroad crossing at Old McHenry Road for evaluation of future improvement needs and provides funding for those improvements. And going back to CMAP, the CMAP evaluation of priority railroad grade crossings in northeastern Illinois. That study identified the CN Railroad at Old McHenry Road crossing as one of 47 locations throughout the northeastern Illinois region for further evaluation of grade separation feasibility and cost effectiveness. Next slide, please. How does the Old McHenry Crossings project fit into the regional transportation network? Within the project area, Old McHenry Road, Quentin Road, and Fairfield Road are county highways under the jurisdiction of Lake County Division of Transportation. Midlothian Road is an unmarked Illinois Department of Transportation roadway, and Echo Lake Road is a Village of Hawthorne Woods jurisdiction roadway. Each of these roadways have a functional classification of minor arterial based on their length, the important connections they provide to the overall regional transportation network, and the relatively high traffic volumes each of them carry. Minor arterial roadways are one step below the regional principal arterial roadway network and provide important transportation connectivity by accommodating interregional or intercounty service, which is shown here on the exhibit on the left. As a result, these roadways service both local trips within the project area and longer distance trips through or partially within the project area. The table on the right speaks to that and shows the results of an analysis of travel trips within and adjacent to the project area during the daily peak travel periods. The results show that approximately 18% of all trips are fully within the analysis area, with 44% of trips having an origin or destination outside the analysis area, and 38% of trips passing entirely through the analysis area, with no local origin or destination. So of all the traffic in the project area on a daily basis, approximately 82% has an origin or a destination linked to the larger regional transportation network, which is consistent with the volume of traffic carried and the growth in those traffic volumes over the years. Next slide, please. So how is the project area expected to grow with respect to population? The graph on the right shows census population data for the year 2000 and 2020 for the 3 municipalities within the project area. The year 2050 population projections were prepared by CMAP as part of the On to 2050 Comprehensive Regional Plan. The source of this data and this other information is noted here. And I wanted to point out that the sources of all the data that we're using is included in the draft purpose and need document as clickable links. So you'll be able to look at that information when you review that document. As you can see, the project area experienced considerable growth in population from the year 2000 to 2020, and additional growth is projected going forward to the year 2050. As listed on the left, the population growth from 2020 to 2050 is projected to be about 17 or 18% for Hawthorne Woods, Kildare, and Lake Zurich, and about 22% for adjacent unincorporated areas of Lake County or the county at large. Next slide, please. So how is the project area expected to grow with respect to employment? The graph on the right shows census employment data for the year 2002 and 2020 for the same 3 municipalities. The year 2050 employment projections were also prepared by CMAP as part of the On to 2050 plan. As you can see, the project area experienced growth in employment from 2002 to 2020, and additional growth is projected going forward to the year 2050. As listed on the left, the employment growth from 2020 to 2050 is projected to be approximately 40% for Hawthorne Woods, 12% for Kildare, and 14% for Lake Zurich. For adjacent unincorporated areas of Lake County, the growth in employment is projected to be about 19%. Next slide, please. So how does the population and employment growth influence traffic growth? First, average daily traffic, which is included on the vertical scale on this graph on the left, means the total traffic over a 24-hour period in both directions at any given location. This graph shows past or 1996, present or 2021, and projected year 2050 average daily traffic volumes for 4 locations in the project area. From left to right, those locations are Old McHenry Road at the CN Railroad crossing, Fairfield Road north of Old McHenry Road, Midlothian Road north of Old McHenry Road, and then Quentin Road north of Ensel Road. There's more information than this in the purpose and need document. We're just highlighting these 4 locations for the presentation today. For the existing 2021 traffic data, we completed traffic counts in the spring of 21 and then calibrated that data to 2019 pre-pandemic count data and more recent trends within the county and the region at large. This was completed to ensure a valid baseline for existing conditions, since there was a notable drop in traffic volumes in 2020 and through the early part of 2021. The 2050 traffic projections were prepared by CMAP using their regional travel demand model, which incorporates the population and employment growth projections. The 2050 traffic projections are again for the no build condition, which again means no improvements between now and the year 2050 within the project area. This is the growth in average daily traffic that would be expected for that condition. The projected traffic growth in average daily traffic volumes from 2021 to 2050 at these 4 locations is approximately, on a percentage basis, 22% for Old McHenry Road at the CN Railroad crossing, 27% for Fairfield Road north of Old McHenry Road, 8% for Midlothian Road north of Old McHenry Road, and 21% for Quentin Road north of Ensel Road. These are notable increases that have an effect on future travel performance. So I'd like to ask Julia now to review those effects of this growth on travel performance, and then she'll also provide an overview of the recent crash data that we looked at for the project area. Julia, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mike. So based on the projected growth in traffic volumes by the year 2050, what are the intersection capacity needs? Well, first off, how do we measure intersection capacity and performance? A traffic modeling program named Synchro was used to evaluate intersection performance. Synchro is the common and widely accepted modeling program for this type of analysis, and it is also used for design purposes moving forward. Synchro evaluates intersection capacity on the average daily delay experienced by each vehicle traveling through the intersection, which is summarized as a letter grade that is referred to as level of service, or LOS, with A being the best level of service and F being the worst. As shown in this graphic, level service A is free-flowing with little or no congestion or delay. Level service F is essentially gridlocked with severe congestion and delay. Based on IDOT design criteria that will be used for this project, level service C or better is the design objective for reconstruction of arterial roadways, based on balancing facility size and performance. Level service A, B, and C are therefore shown as the color green here and on the next slides. Level service D can be allowable if shown to be the only viable alternative to avoid severe impacts and costs. Level service D is shown as yellow. Level service E is progressively worse and shown as orange, with finally level service F being shown in red. Next slide, please. This graphic shows the Synchro analysis results for the AM and PM peak hour at the major signalized intersections, namely Old McHenry Road at Fairfield Road, Old McHenry Road at Midlothian Road, Old McHenry Road at Quentin Road, and Quentin Road at Illinois Route 22. As you can see on the slide, a side-by-side comparison is provided between the existing intersection performance at each location and the 2050 no-build intersection performance. Shown in the graph key, level of service A, B, and C bars are shown in green, Level of service D is yellow, E is orange, and finally F is red. This analysis is based on a no train crossing condition. We did look at the effects on intersection performance when gates are down at the railroad crossing, and of course, intersection performance is negatively affected. You will see in the purpose and need document an analysis of traffic backups caused by train crossings at these locations, and the backups certainly are affected and affect the adjacent intersections under existing conditions. We put that aside for the purposes of this analysis because that would be mitigated by a grade separation at the CN Railroad crossing, which is a key element of the project purpose and need. As shown in the bar chart, based on the projected increases in traffic volume, the level of service at each intersection, will worsen for both the AM and PM peak periods for the 2050 no-build condition. Notably, 3 of the intersections will worsen to a level of service E or F during the AM peak period. Next slide, please. This graphic shows the synchro results for a couple existing unsignalized intersections, namely Old McHenry Road at Echo Lake Road and Quentin Road at Highland Drive. As shown in the bar chart, based on projected increases in traffic volumes, the level of service at both intersections will degrade to F for both the AM and PM peak period for the 2050 no-build condition, which is represented by the red bars. Next slide, please. So thus far, we've highlighted the 2050 no-build analysis results of the intersections, and we've mentioned that a grade separation at the CN Railroad is a key element for the project purpose. So why is that, and what are the capacity needs at the CN Railroad crossing? There are a few key elements of this analysis. They include that there are 17 existing daily train crossings. Those crossings are likely to increase to 25 train crossings based on regional projections, of freight volume increase by the year 2050. Next, of the 17 existing crossings, 11 are typically during the day, either during or very near to the AM and PM peak travel periods, with 6 at night. And finally, based on our field measurements, the average amount of time the gates are down for each crossing event is 4.1 minutes. From this, we can calculate the induced traffic delay for all stopped vehicles. Although we are using 4.1 minutes as the average gate down time to calculate delay, it is well known and acknowledged that the gates down time at this crossing has been and can be significantly longer for individual events. The top table shows the analysis results for traffic delay associated with the gates down event during the critical AM peak hour of travel and the total daily traffic delay for all 17 events, for both existing conditions and for the year 2050 no-build conditions. Based on this analysis, accounting for projected increases in vehicle and train traffic, the total daily traffic delay at the CN Railroad crossing is estimated to increase by 110% by the year 2050, which is quite a significant increase. The bottom table shows the cost of this delay on the daily and annual basis for the existing conditions and for the year 2050. At the very bottom of the slide, you will also see the accrued cost of user delay between now and the year 2050. This is also a significant number that begins to speak to the cost benefit of considering a grade separation. Next slide, please. The project team has also completed a comprehensive review of the vehicle crashes within the project area for the 5-year period from 2015 to 2019. Although the year 2020 crash data is available, it is generally not being used at this time due to pandemic-related traffic reductions, but we are still looking at individual crashes in 2020, especially if they involved severe injuries. For example, we are aware of the severe injury crash in 2020 on Old McHenry Road near Mulberry Drive. Although not shown on this map, we are considering the contributing factors of that 2020 crash moving forward. The pie chart on this slide displays a breakdown of the 373 crashes that occurred within the project area during the 2015 to 2019 period, separated by crash type. As seen here, 74% of the crashes that occurred were either rear end or turning type crashes, which are generally related to intersection congestion and motorist frustration. Regarding crash severity during the evaluation period, 6 type A crashes occurred, which are crashes that involved severe injury, and there was 1 crash involving a fatality, which is referred to as a type K crash. This was the crash that was on Old McHenry Road near St. Matthew's Church in 2019. A total of 101 injuries resulted from all crashes that occurred between 2015 and 2019. The map on the left is referred to as a crash heat map. The map represents volume and severity of crashes that occurred. This data allows us to see the safety hotspots that represent an existing baseline condition for comparison of improvement alternatives. The notable intersection safety hotspots include Old McHenry Road at Fairfield Road, Old McHenry Road at Midlothian Road, Old McHenry Road at Quentin Road to a slightly lesser extent, and finally, Quentin Road at Illinois Route 22. Going forward, we will be using a crash prediction model to compare the overall safety of the potential alternatives to the existing N2050 no-build conditions. At this time, I would like to pass it back to Mike to go over additional information available and to summarize what we've heard so far. Mike?
Thank you, Julia. We covered the key transportation elements of the purpose and need statement. It's a lot of information, but again, to remind everyone, you'll each have a chance to review the draft purpose and need document. We hope to get that out by Monday to the SIG members for review. And as I mentioned before, that will also then go to review by the county, by the Illinois Department of Transportation, and the Federal Highway Administration. This document is, as I said up front, is a requirement of NEPA. We prepare documents almost very much like this, if not identical to this, for all projects of this type that we get involved with, and it is a NEPA requirement. So keep that in mind as you review it. Other elements that are covered in the document that we really didn't go over too much today, but you'll see, we talk about what the existing project setting and characteristics are. There's more information on the safety analysis that we completed, some of the key takeaways from that. We also talk about what the mobility needs are from a emergency service perspective, public service perspective, and accessibility from residential, commercial driveways, et cetera. We talk also about the non-motorized connection needs in that document. And there's also a summary of stakeholder input received to date via the website, via the virtual forum, and the first stakeholder involvement group meeting. So it's about a 21 page document, and we're planning to get that out to the group on Monday to take a look at it. Next slide, please. So in summary, the principal conclusions reached in the draft purpose and need document are stated here. And basically, population and employment growth is projected to increase about 20% on average within the Old McHenry Crossings project area by the year 2050. And this will result in increased traffic volumes. With those projected increases in traffic volumes and a likely increase in number of trains, congestion and delay will increase throughout the project area if no improvements are made, which again is that 2050 no action or no build condition. If no improvements are made, safety is expected to degrade as traffic volumes and congestion increase. And that is for all users. So not just vehicular safety, but non-motorized safety with pedestrians, bicyclists also will degrade. That safety will degrade over time for that no build condition with the projected increases in traffic. And a grade separation of the Canadian National Railroad will be evaluated to alleviate congestion and delay at that crossing, and also will help things out from a larger perspective within the overall project area. So this establishes the basis for identifying and evaluating alternatives going forward, which we'll discuss next. But before we move on to alternatives, we want to take a pause here. We're going to have a little Q&A session to answer any questions you might have at this time on the purpose and need document. And again, you'll also have the opportunity to send questions and comments back to us after you've reviewed the document. So with that, I want to turn it back over to Ben for discussion of any questions you might have. Ben?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Julia. That lot of information there, a lot to digest. Wanted to just reiterate, we will be sending out this slide deck to everyone. And of course, the meeting is being recorded. You'll be able to go back and listen to this as well. So as Mike mentioned, I'd like to field any questions you guys have at this time. Didn't see any in the chat come through. But if, at this point, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and just go ahead and ask away. I know Eric is always good for a question or two.
I'm in. Thank you.
Not to put you on the spot, but
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So yeah, just general comments that the village has made before. Just, we understand that the delay time that we see with the study that you did by the trains was about 4 minutes, 4.1 minutes. And, over the years, the village has seen significantly longer delay times, up to 2 or 3 hours at some times. I know St. Matthews has been greatly impacted. The YMCA has been impacted. The village has, and all of our residents. So I know that's an important thing for the village to get across in the study, which I know you understand. And then as well as that, just the safety aspect of not being able to get across the tracks, if you need to get a fire truck to the other side or a police car or something along those lines. So I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Erica, for that comment. Obviously, the crossing there, when a train is stopped, there's nothing you can do. The emergency responders are often stuck and having to go miles out of the way. We certainly understand that. The figure that we've presented here is based on a 24-hour weekday count that we took an average of the gate downtime. Just wanted to reiterate that doesn't represent the delay time per se. You would most certainly see a longer delay, especially if you were farther back in the queue there. And we understand that there's been situations and incidents or occurrences, I should say, where that train has stopped and blocked the crossing for much longer than 4 minutes.
And just to interject on that, Ben, we do address that in the purpose and need document, Erica. You'll see that there's not a lot of detail on what some of those significant events are, but we do at least lay out in the document that they occur and that those are very serious potential safety issues with the response time for police and fire and the like. So that is addressed at least in that context within the purpose and need document.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Question or comment? Just thinking about your own experiences driving through the corridor, residents, business owners, employees of agencies along the corridor, thinking of your personal experiences driving through here, what have you experienced in terms of operation deficiencies or possible safety issues, things like that? What comes to mind?
Hi.
Joel.
Just generally, I understood everything that you guys presented so far, and I know that there's some traffic backups in certain places. You got some delays based on, the Midlothian, Fairfield, Old McHenry section. It's just a goofy layout to begin with. It's 3 roads on one side and a cross section. And I would tell you from driving through, whether it's Quentin Road and Old McHenry, or whether it's that intersection I just described, most of the time people are trying to beat the light. They're not really long greens to begin with. And so a lot of times cars are trying to go through there and they're stacked up trying to get 2 or 3 people through on the yellow. And I'm sure that's adding to some of the accidents that are there. But the speed limits aren't high. And I know that there's a number of distracted drivers these days too that add to a lot of that rear end scenarios, So living on Quentin Road, what I see is that we get a backup on Quentin Road exactly when the train goes across, because then that stretch of traffic backs up to Old McHenry. And of course, you can't flow through that intersection at all. And that's the same as over on Old McHenry and, Fairfield and Midlothian. So really the train crossing does back up all those other roads. If you just had it flows pretty readily in the AM and the PM from my observations, generally speaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that, Joel. Yeah, certainly the configuration of all these roadways coming together at a single point, you're adding the southbound in the morning, just thinking of the overall transportation network here. All of the traffic coming eastbound from Route 12, all of the southbound traffic on Fairfield converging together in this short segment on Old McHenry. Congestion occurs, and obviously when there's a train crossing, it just makes things worse. And we hear you on the backups on Quentin and the speeds as well as an issue. Yeah, I see a hand raised. Catherine Spara, hi.
Hey, thank you. And I just wanted to say thank you to all those that put all their efforts and work into this, because it's been obviously, very thoroughly done and extensive. So thank you for all the considerations that have been made. And we're looking forward to this improvement, especially for the first responders that need to get through. I mean, lives could be lost here. So just wanted to say thanks and great job.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Hi, Patrice. Go ahead.
On you. I live on Heather Lane, which intersects Quentin, and so my problem is those when the train is passing, and also when it's just let up. Because then you have all the core cars that were backed up, turning right if they're coming from the west, turning right onto Quentin. And I just can't get out of that community. So that's it. I'm surprised there's not been more accidents at the intersection of, maybe there have, I'm just not aware of the intersection of Quentin Road and Heather Lane. Because then people are frustrated and they speed coming around that corner from Old McHenry turning right onto Quentin. You could sit there for quite a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that could be very frustrating. Thank you for your comment.
I guess I have a question, if I may.
Sure, go ahead, Bob.
In regards just to, other than this study, how far outside of this area has the study figured in the other areas? Because I know you get to 22, it's a disaster. You get to 12, it's a disaster. You get up to Midlothian, I know there's some improvements possibly happening up there. Up Midlothian, you can't get near to, gosh, I can't even think of the streets, but you can't get up. It takes about 45 minutes to get from Old McHenry all the way up to, I can't think of the road, Peterson possibly. Have you guys figured, you're going to fix this problem, but what other problems are you creating?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that question, Bob. I'm going to ask Mike Makovic maybe to address that, but just in general, our study limits have been defined and concurred with through the Lake County DOT, IDOT, and FHWA, just to look at this grade crossing issue and the intersections surrounding it. And then the Quentin Road piece was included in the Lake County 2050 planning document. And so, just in terms of, why this area, that's why this project is focusing on this area. Mike, I'll let you speak on, maybe the bigger area and planning efforts for other roadways here.
Thanks, Ben. And so certainly there are other transportation challenges within the county. We talked about it earlier in the presentation, their 2040 long-range transportation plan, and then their 5-year transportation improvement program. If you haven't had a chance to look through that, I would recommend it. It speaks to a lot of those other issues, and we try to tackle these projects that have unique purpose and need to them, tackle them individually. And as Ben said, and we talked about earlier, this particular issue, not only the grade crossing, but the adjacent intersections to the grade crossings and the adjacent sections of Old McHenry and Quentin Road. It's been discussed for quite some time. The ICC flagged it as part of their safety improvement program. And then we also had CMAP look at this as one of 47 crossings in the region to be improved. So we start to formulate and focus in on the project area. We did go through a process of working with the county, with IDOT and the Federal Highway Administration to make sure that, that this project, what we call logical termini, are appropriately set to be addressing the challenge of the project, the purpose and need, and look at it from a big picture from an environmental perspective. But again, the other challenges that might be, in front of us throughout the county, there is a long-range plan that starts to speak to some of those other projects. Not sure if that answered the question entirely, but the intent there was just to kind of tell you how we framed out this project and the logical termini.
Sure. Erica, I see your hand raised. Did you want to add something there?
Yeah, Bob, I wanted to mention that, Gilmer and Midlothian is going to be improved with an intersection improvement by Lake County DOT in the next couple of years, which, helps a lot, I'm sure, but helps part of the situation. The other improvement that's coming up is Route 22. IDOT has in their 21, 20 to 26 5-year improvement plan, the improvements on Route 22, and it's probably year 5 or pretty far out in the 5-year program, but they are looking to widen Route 22, 2 lanes in each direction. So that will be an improvement also.
Great. Thank you, Erica.
Appreciate the feedback. Yeah, I haven't looked through all the documents, but I was just raising that question while we're on this. That's all. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, no problem, Bob. Anytime. And if you do get a chance to dive into those documents, let us know if you have any questions at any time. We'd be happy to walk you through that.
And by the way, just to interject, again, those documents are also linked. There's clickable links within the purpose and need document to those other documents as well. So it'll take you right to those documents.
Anyone else?
Yeah, Ben, this is George Sandberg. I've got a question in terms of alternate studies. How are the alternate solutions to be considered going to be implemented in terms of, other alternate suggestions, whether it's above grade, below grade, the railroad crosses, or a reconfiguration of the intersections? What are the general alternative proposals, and how will they be evaluated?
Great question. Thank you for that, George. The range of alternatives that we're going to be looking at haven't completely been defined yet. We are working on that as we speak, but those will be evaluated by looking at a range of criteria established to compare the various alternatives. Those will include transportation, performance, safety, mobility, and non-motorized accommodations. Any impacts to the surrounding areas will be accounted for. Costs will be a part of the evaluation process as well. In terms of underpass, overpass, we've heard that question a lot. I know Hawthorne Woods has heard that question from a lot of their residents. Both of those options will be on the table. The design around those issues, the grade separation is going to be a challenge, certainly in terms of making any changes to the railroad itself is going to be difficult in terms of the elevation of the tracks. And so anything that needs to be done will likely have to be done to the roadway itself, whether it needs to be lowered or raised over the tracks. So those are things we're going to be getting into in our SIG 3 meeting in May. Just leave it at that. And if anybody else wants to add on, feel free.
Okay. Well, the reason I brought that up is just food for thought with this study, which is wonderful. And I commend everybody for their involvement on this. It's just that over the 35 years that I have personally had to go through these intersections, which started with stop signs and 2 lanes, to a multitude of lanes and turn signals and a multitude of traffic lights, the above or below grade railroad separation will just alleviate the problems that occur when the railroad is coming through. But the increase of traffic with a grade separation, will not be remedied. So therefore, this is an opportunity to take a look at the growth rate, and just at a grade separation will only alleviate the problems that occur when there's a railroad crossing going on. But it will not, I think this is the time to take a look at a network of roads or other potential solutions, because I still have maps showing these same intersections other than, minute articulations of them back from the 1870s. And these intersections were here at that time. So it's amazing that it isn't an urban center at this point. But I think we should just be able to take advantage of this big picture and see how the traffic alleviation could happen, for the whole community, and take advantage of this program now.
Hey, Ben, could I interject?
Yep.
Yeah, so I think two things there. First and foremost, that's kind of the second part of the discussion today. We've walked you through the purpose and need, which is really the foundation of the project, and really sets the table for identifying reasonable alternatives going forward. So the second part of the presentation today is really to begin the conversation about the range of alternatives to be considered. And as far as the traffic volumes with and without a grade separation, effectively the 2050 projections we have do not consider the grade separation. So there's no impediment, if you will, in the regional transportation model for the grade crossing itself. So these are projected volumes that we would expect to see, that we are expecting to see based on CMAP's model with a grade separation in place. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, sure. No, thank you.
Okay, sure. Thanks for your
I have a quick question, if I could, please.
Sure.
What is the required distance? We're talking about the separation going under or over the tracks, whether it's the road that's raised or lowered, or whether it's the tracks that are raised or lowered. Just what is the general distance from the surface that you'd have to go? So in other words, are we talking about from Midlothian, a change in grade from Midlothian to Quentin through that area? Because it's not a really long stretch. And I use the example of Route 22 when they expanded it through Lake Zurich to go the bypass, and they went underneath. And that's a sizable length of, it doesn't seem like it when you're driving it at 40 miles an hour, but it's a fair distance that will affect all the surface stuff there.
Sure. No, that's a great question, Joel. Highly dependent on what alternative is selected, whether an overpass or an underpass, dependent on the required vertical clearance at the bridge structure, and the roadway profile grades on the approaches. You're right, that distance between Midlothian and Quentin is not a long distance. We don't know exactly what length that would be yet, but
was it a fair assessment to say that it's going to go most of that length?
Yeah,
I can interject on that, Ben, if you want.
Yeah, go ahead,
we've taken some peeks at that, Joel. Nothing that's ready for prime time yet, but we've taken some peeks at that. And I think the rule of thumb is it's longer to go over because you have to be 23 feet over the railroad, whereas you have to be 15 feet of clearance to go under. And it depends how high is the railroad today versus the roadway. So by rule of thumb, it's generally shorter to go under, but then you have to look at the drainage issues and stuff like that. So the quick look at is we think we can fit it going under. We probably will be some effect on the Lothian Road intersection, but it's tight. It's tight for sure. And that's kind of the next step in the process here, is start looking at that stuff.
The reason I bring that up is because if you use that same stretch of road to improve the crossing, doesn't that add an added layer of complexity to both intersections on the east and west side that we're talking about, Midlothian and Quentin and Old McHenry?
Well, I think the short answer there is if the goal here is to look at taking that grade crossing and the adverse effect of a gates down event out of the equation, and then make sure we're moving traffic through those intersections based on the projected traffic volume. So we have to look at that. That's the picture we're going to be looking at. And the goal is to, as Julia spoke to, we're shooting for level service C. And a lot of these intersections, if we don't do anything, are going to be in that level service EF range by the year 2050. So we want to come up with something as our goal to be down in that level service C, maybe level service D range for 2050. So it's going to take some work at all those intersections.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree with the congestion issue from the tracks. I think we all do. But I guess I also imagine that, you know, that's a pretty widely used intersection, both of those. And you're going to have, let's just propose for my head, if you go under, you're going to come up on both sides of the tracks at each of those intersections. You also have to negotiate right turn lanes and left turn lanes for a length that's commensurate with how many car lengths that you want to go in there. So I picture those as being almost on a hillside. Well, I don't say hillside, but an incline going into those intersections where you're stacking up cars. And doesn't that create sort of a blinded corners scenario?
It can, and it certainly can. And those are going to be key issues going forward. There's criteria we have to meet. You can't use any grade. We generally want to shoot for 5% grade or less as far as the grade of the roadway. So those are all real issues, and we will be taking a close look at them with all these alternatives. The last thing we want to do is create something that's, you know, with poor sight distance.
Yeah, because you're flanked with, you know, the church on one side and the garden center. And then you've got a couple of homes and primarily you got the park with the soccer field that's right on that stretch of road as well.
Yeah, absolutely good points, Joel. And that's kind of going to be our focus here going forward.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Joel. All right, well, it's 3 o'clock. We're about halfway through our presentation here. I think at this time, we'd like to take a 5-minute break and come back and continue our presentation. We've got a little bit of material to share with you on alternative development, and then we're going to do a small group breakout session again and get some more feedback from you all. So, and then if you do have any questions, keep them in your back pocket. We will have another Q&A session at the end here. So we'll take a quick break and meet back at 3:05.
Great. Thanks, Ben.
All righty. As we're getting settled back in, hopefully you're able to get a refill on your water or coffee and take a quick break here. 5 minutes goes by pretty quick. But we've got a lot more to go over, so let's continue our presentation. I'm going to ask Matt Smith to take this next part and discuss alternative development and evaluation process. Matt?
All right, thanks, Ben. All right, welcome back, everybody. I've got about 5 minutes, maybe a little bit more information to cover with you, and then we'll get into our small group discussions. So to start off here, I'm going to repeat this slide from earlier, where this is our project development slide. And now we're going to be talking about what happens as we move into step 3, which is focusing here on the range of alternatives, something I know we're already just asking about. So moving to the next slide. Kind of taking that bubble for number 3 and breaking it out into some additional detail to help understand our next steps. So we're going to have part of our breakout session is to ask some questions of you. So we're going to be trying to develop this list of alternatives. That list will be all looking at things and how they perform in the 2050 design year. And we'll also be looking at also including the no build alternative as well. So we have a basis to compare against. My expectation, we're probably gonna have 10 to 15 different build alternatives, maybe less, maybe more, but that's kind of where we think we're probably headed. Moving over to the right, so this level 1 screening would be our second step. So we'll review how those alternatives meet our purpose and need and assess whether there are any fatal flaws that would prevent an alternative from being considered. And then that would line up with what we'll present to the group at our next SIG meeting number 3. And then we also plan to share that information at the second public information meeting. So continuing to move over to the right, next we have our level 2 screening, where we will consider a more detailed assessment of the remaining alternatives. And then ultimately move into that final box where we're selecting our preferred alternative. And then input from you as our SIG and also the public will be obtained multiple steps along the way as shown on the bottom of the slide. So on the next slide here, kind of trying to answer the question, how are we going to develop alternatives and what are they based on? So this is all the various items that we need to consider in developing our alternatives, with one of these keys being stakeholder input, but also combining that with how are we addressing or accommodating non-motorized vehicles, intersection control types, crash prediction modeling. I know Patrice mentioned as an example what's going on at Heather and Quentin. How do we make that operate better? Mobility improvements, all that has to be molded into how we're trying to come up with alternatives that solve those problems. And as we're getting started here, we've already seen from the traffic and safety studies where the critical needs are along both of these roadways and at the intersections. And we know from our first meeting with you, what are some of the issues and needs that you see. And so that'll be part of developing this list of alternatives. So on the next slide, I want to answer the question, like, how do we intend to make comparisons and be able to present them in a way that's simple and logically? So we intend that we will create a matrix like this, where we'll spell out the evaluation criteria from the purpose and need along the left side, and then across the top, left to right, listing out all of the alternatives. So we'll have an existing conditions, a 2050 no build, and then all the different proposed alternatives. And the comparisons are more than just numbers. You know, we do plan to complete an assessment of the numbers too. So that's where you see that colored chart there. So we can kind of see which ones are comparing better than others. And that graduated color scale will help us differentiate between alternatives. We are all engineers here, most of us on the project team, so we like to get into the numbers, but we feel like the colors sometimes help show things kind of that maybe a number doesn't necessarily provide. And so we plan to do both of those things with the different criteria that you're going to help us develop. And all of this work here on the level 1 is really going to be based on our initial traffic modeling results, and then combined with some concept level alternative designs. And that's how we're going to compare these alternatives here. And then that's, again, what we plan to show you at SIG number 3. All right, and the next slide. So from here, I imagine once we're done with the level 1, we may have these 10 to 15. And let's say we get down to 3 or 4 or 5 alternatives that seem to be better than all the rest. So then what happens? So those move to level 2. And then we would add more criteria across the left side there where we're looking more detailed. How do these alternatives affect the environment? What about some socioeconomic impacts? What are their relative costs? Things like that. So these will be compared based on much more detailed engineering studies. So you're going to really see a difference when we come back to you at SIG 3. I think you'll see that some of the tools are still more high level, but then when we get into SIG 4 with the level 2 screening would be much more detailed. Well, I know this may seem a little vague because we're just showing you an empty box and there really isn't any details yet, but we're really hoping that your input today is really going to help us figure out what the right criteria are that we need to look at, as well as what are some ideas here just to get started with some of the alternatives. All right, Ben, back to you.
All right, thank you, Matt. At this point, we would like to use some of these cool Zoom features and split you all up into small groups and discuss more, hear back from you. We're going to have 2 project team members in each group help facilitate the discussion. For those of you that weren't at the first meeting, you won't need to do anything with your Zoom. I'm going to click a button and everyone will be whisked away into another Zoom. It'll be a room, and the Zoom software will handle everything, and you'll be off on your way. So we've budgeted about 20 minutes of discussion here, and then we'll come back and report out for about 15 minutes, 5 minutes for each group, just to recap what you discussed inside of the breakout rooms. So it's 3:12 right now. So I'll say at about 3:35, we'll start coming back to the large group, and some of us that aren't listed on the screen here may pop in and just listen in to the discussion. So I will pull up this breakout rooms thing and click the button, and we'll be whisked away. Everybody ready to go? All right, here we go. All right, we'll be getting everybody back here in a few seconds, and we'll go through a recap of the discussions here. So just probably about 30 more seconds. Where's the rest of your group, Matt? Oh, here they come. There's Patrice. I see Erica. Well, maybe they are all here. Maybe I just don't have everybody.
The experience of ending the breakout session was not as harsh as I remember last time. I remember last time it just stopped right in the middle of somebody talking.
Yeah.
This one was like you actually had, so I was cautious that we ended on time, and then I got a thing that was like, well, you can extend for 60 more seconds. Like, oh, well, I already kind of ended it.
You had wrapped it up already, so you just let it end. Yeah. That's good.
Technology.
Very anticlimactic.
Jody, I'm going to have you begin. Do you want to share your screen and show your notes?
Yes.
Let me just make sure everybody's back. I think we're still waiting. I almost asked, is everyone back? If you're not here, raise your hand.
Group 3 is back.
Group 3 is back. Okay, I think we've got everyone. Matt Huffman, you're here as well. So, okay, Jody, I'm going to have you go ahead and share your screen and give us a recap on what your group talked about.
All right. Thank you, Ben. Let me pull it up here. Is everyone seeing this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And anyone from our group or Matt Smith, please jump in here. So major components to consider. So what we heard was that, pedestrian traffic is not really something that's seen along the corridor, but is there an expectation that pedestrian traffic could grow? Should it be better accommodated in the work that we're doing? There were notes that bicyclists do use the corridor today. There was a comment about the tiers of evaluation that we're going to be doing when we look through the alternates. And it was noted that the environmental and socioeconomic factors were sort of put as tier 2, and that perhaps they should be considered as important as the other factors in tier 1. There was also a comment about providing better consistency to the flow of traffic. This was coming also primarily from the school district, and an interest in getting kids to school safely. Anybody that's over 1.5 miles away from school, they qualify for buses, but the buses back up just like everyone else today with railroad backups. And so that's a concern. There was a question that I guess there had been some concerns floating around in a neighborhood that if there was a grade separation, would St. Matthew's Church require a second access from Heather Lane? That's not anything that our team has talked about or considered. It was just a question that was posed. At Apex Landscaping, there were some recent improvements that were made to the business, and will the roadway have traditional curb and gutter, and how would that impact the business? Again, that would be something that we would look at as we get into design. Will Lagoon Road have some proposed turn lanes, was a question. And then there's a question about options to purchase land to provide more flexibility in design solutions. Matt Smith, you have a much better way to talk about that. Do you want to address that one?
Yeah, and then I have one more thing to add. So yeah, the discussion there was just that the federal process would not provide a whole lot of flexibility there. It would really depend on the size of the property and how much land is acquired. If significant amount of land, say half the property is needed, then there'd be a discussion about possibly purchasing the whole thing. We had a little bit of technical problem at the beginning, so I wanted to mention too, Jody, and you could add it in there, just the importance of safety. Patrice had mentioned that at the get-go, that and really safety across all the different things, pedestrians, bicyclists, vehicles, that's got to be paramount in anything that we're coming up with from an alternative perspective.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. I was missing.
We were
that.
Scrambling at the beginning there, getting.
Oh, poor Ben was scrambling more than me. Then the other part of our discussion was talking about, if folks had a magic wand and could fix something in the corridor that we maybe could consider as we think through this project, what are those trouble areas? And so we heard about the area between Fairfield, Old McHenry, and Quentin. There's 2 southbound turn lanes, and they all kind of funnel into 1 lane in Quentin. It causes a lot of conflict during rush hour, especially, and angry drivers, which we don't want. We also heard about the drop-off functions at the church. Kids and parishioners have drop-offs, and in the last few years, the church has installed a drop-off lane and reconfigured their parking lot to accommodate those drop-offs. Did I miss anything from our group? Okay, I think that's all we got. We'll stop sharing. Yep.
All right, thanks, Jody. Group 2, Julia, I'm going to have you go ahead and maybe Matt, if you can chime in too, go ahead and give us a recap on what you guys talked about.
Well, we had such a riveting conversation that we did not get to our note sheet. So I can share it, but it looks exactly as the blank version. However, we talked about safety and mobility, specifically accessing Quentin Road from driveways that are along it. We mentioned the safety of buses exiting and entering the church on Old McHenry Road during their peak hours of normal traffic congestion and also school peak hours, and the effects of the intersection delays if we were to incorporate a grade separation. Matt, do you want to add anything else?
I think we were talking a lot, so we'll have to populate our sheet here. But I think our focus was really a lot on, we had 3 folks in our group today. So we had a lot of Quentin Road discussions with mobility being a big focus from, with the church and school. And then also all of the residential properties that have very short driveways that abut the roadway, older properties, the density of driveway. So being able to, backing your car out onto Quentin Road, there's just not a lot of space for people to maneuver their cars. So, having acceptable gaps, safety, mobility, obviously the congestion, the amount of cars being able to get out, a lot of school, similar things to probably St. Matthews with a lot of buses coming in and out, drop-offs. There's a lot of conflict, a lot of delay. So really hitting on that mobility component is a big thing along the Quentin Road corridors. We talked a lot about that, safety as well. So they kind of went hand in hand. And then as far as, we started segueing into kind of the regional discussion of, what options can we do? And I think there was some discussion about, is it a possibility to cul-de-sac, the roadways and reroute traffic other places, and looking at some of those options. And I think, the message that we talked through is that, as of right now, all options are on the table. This is when we want to get all the ideas out there and starting going through the process and comparing things against our purpose and needs. So our focus really was predominantly on the Quentin Road corridor. And I don't know from our group if I missed anything in that kind of upfront conversation that we started off with.
Yeah, any of the 3 folks in group 2, feel free to chime in if you felt like anything was missed.
I think that, the other thing we talked about too is traffic, having alternatives that didn't generate more traffic than the 2050. That was a discussion point that we started getting to towards the end of our group discussion there. But yeah, the challenges of the grade separation, the proximity of intersections, that was an overall theme as well for us.
Yeah, I think I'll just chime in real quick, Matt. Yeah, I mean, you hit all the big notes that we talked about, obviously, but I guess I just want to say my big concern as a resident on the road is that, again, improvements that invite more traffic are going to be as much a hazard to us who live on the road. And, you're inviting more noise, you're inviting, quality of life goes down a little bit, and I do think it adds safeties in other areas where it might improve some things. It's also going to hamper others. And the short driveways are a real concern for me. And then the road noise and the amount of extra traffic that you're going to get down that small area, and it's 9/10 of a mile. It's a mile long because it's already improved wider at the intersections, which you could do improvements to, I guess, up at McHenry, certainly. But again, that's my major concerns.
Right. And I think, building on that, Joel, too, was the, that stretch of Quentin Road there, you got the signal at Enzo, and then there's a good distance up to Old McHenry Road. So, you really don't have, you have a lot of minor side street intersections, a lot of interface of driveways. The church over there too is probably the busiest access point between Enzel and Old McHenry Road. So really, that mobility accessibility is kind of a huge focus point, combining with the safety. And I think, Joel, you're touching on kind of the environmental impacts, the noise, the effects on the property from the roadway.
Right. And we also have, you look at, this was touched on in the other meeting that I wasn't in, but I mean, you've got drainage concerns, you more impervious surface, curbs, channeling that into our lake. That's another thing that happens as well. And, I'm in a situation where I've got creek access in my rear yard, which goes into the lake. So then that's going to have a larger amount of funneling water through that. That's a concern for me as well. So.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Joel. We appreciate it. And we'll get those notes synthesized and documented there. So, all right. So group 3, Chuck and Matt Sis, why don't you guys share what you talked about?
Matt, do you want to lead the discussion? Yeah, sorry, couldn't find my unmute button. It disappeared. So we, touched on a lot of the things that other groups talked about. Our group really focused on access to businesses along Old McHenry, both after construction and during construction, and to make sure that, you know, we can maintain that access for both, you know, people visiting the stables and the gardens, but also semis for deliveries and everything that go on. And you know, the other thing we touched on is land acquisitions being something to consider for major components and how we can decide which alternatives are better. And then we kind of jumped down into what should we consider in some of these alternatives to try to get some ideas from the group. And a lot of it was also based on access to these businesses along Old McHenry, you know, with the right turn lane in front of the gardens being too short. So people are getting confused. Are they turning right onto Quentin Road eastbound on Old McHenry, or are they turning into the gardens? So there's confusion there with the drivers. And then as you head further west towards Forward Stride, there's no left turn lane. So there's a lot of backup and traffic for both people visiting and deliveries to the stables. And another suggestion was, well, what if we just, you know, improve signal timing? And that might help, you know, longer turn phases on the lights to kind of clear the queue so that there's not as much backup. And potentially looking at changing the speed limits along some of these routes to try to improve safety. And then we kind of talked about, you know, what would be preferred, an overpass or an underpass. And from the perspective of some of the group members that we had, you know, an underpass probably seems more feasible because overpass, how would you maintain access to some of these local businesses or the church along the route? Chuck or any members of the group, if I missed anything, I know we had a lot of questions that we discussed, you know, adding to some of the stuff that we discussed in the previous presentations, but if I missed anything, feel free to chime in. I think you covered it.
Sounds like you got it all, Matt. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm going to take the screen back here and talk about next steps. I'm sure everyone, you know, feels like they could have probably continued talking about this. I know that we're all passionate about improving our quality of life and you know, safety and hopefully in the future we get more opportunities to talk in small groups like this, and you know, hopefully we can make the time a little bit longer too, so we can share a little bit more. I know maybe we got some of the conversations cut off a little bit here, but all right, so wrapping up here, just looking at next steps. As Mike mentioned early on, we do have a draft purpose and need document that we will be sharing with you. The next communication that you receive from us will be that document, and we'll be sending that out on Monday. And we just ask you to consider a little bit of homework, if you will. Take a review, you know, review the document, send us comments or questions, and you know, we will take that feedback into account. A more detailed look at our timeline here. We're going to continue working on outlining a range of alternatives, taking into account your great input here that we heard today, including the no build option and all the build alternatives that we're considering. We're going to put all of those into the evaluation tables, those blank evaluation tables that Matt showed you. And those will be our preliminary results of the performance with an array of colors coding the best through the worst, so that we can start to flesh out what alternatives might be carried forward here. And then, you know, maybe, so that will be SIG 3, and we're looking at a May timeframe for that. We'll present those alternatives at a public meeting where we will post documents and studies and exhibits for all of the public, not just the SIG members here, but it will be available for everyone to make public comment on. And then the 4th and 5th SIG meetings as needed are shown there on the timeline. So next meeting here will be in May, the next time we all get together. And we certainly look forward to getting back together with you. Again, we'll post the videos on YouTube and send the link out to everyone. We'll send out a meeting summary and a summary of the small group discussions as well. So with that concludes our presentation today. And we've got about 5 minutes left here. Not a whole lot of time, but as promised, if there's any other questions that came up in your mind, any other comments that you'd like to make, we'd like to just give you an opportunity to do that now. Matt, were there any other written comments in the chat?
No, we haven't gotten anything here.
Hey, Ben, I'll jump in here too. This is Kevin from Lake County DOT. So I just want to again thank everyone for their time. I know it's a couple hours out of your afternoon and everyone's got very busy schedules, you know, whether you're at work or at home or what have you. So this is very important. I know these first couple are a little heavy on the administrative side, but as everyone's mentioning here, the next couple will start getting into some alternatives and some discussion along the way. So really appreciate everyone's time. This is very helpful to us, and you know, have a safe evening and weekend if we don't talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. All right. Well, you guys know where to reach us, omxteam@transsystems.com, or you can reach out to us through the project website. Thank you for your time again, and we'll see you next time. Drive safe, everybody.
Thank you.